Hi, Gene Monterastelli here, the editor of tappingqna.com. The video that you are about to watch is a conversation that was a part of this year's 24 Hours of Tapping. The 24 Hours of Tapping is a fundraiser for the amazing work that is done by the Peaceful Heart Network. The Peaceful Heart Network has brought tapping to migrants, refugees, prisoners, and the underprivileged in over 30 countries all over the world. As you watch this video, if you learned something, if you were touched by it, if you were inspired by it, the easiest way to say thank you is to support the work of the Peaceful Heart Network. To do that, all you need to do is go to 24hoursoftapping.com/support. And as you look in the description and the first comment down below, you will see a direct link to that. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Next up is Andy Hunt. Andy is an EFT International master trainer and an NLP trainer who is also trained in person-centered counseling and studied many other healing modalities. Since 2002, he has been working as a self-employed psychological therapist and trainer with clients from all over the world from his home in the United Kingdom. Andy works with people whose emotional lives have been badly distorted by early life experiences and as adults find their lives at the mercy of the wounds of their younger selves. He helps his clients to find and heal their younger selves so they can be more integrated and have a resourceful life. Here's a conversation with Andy where he is sharing his process on how to do exactly that. So one of the things I'm always interested in when people say, hey, I want to talk about this particular topic, why is this something that interests you, or is it something that you work with regularly? How did you find to a spot where this is something that you thought would be like, is something that you spend your time thinking about in a deliberate way?
Okay, so, most great ideas, most great therapeutic ideas, it's kind of came into, I wanted to use it on myself or find something for myself. I always had this sneaking suspicion that I wasn't good enough, or I would find myself doing things to please other people or to be accepted by other people. And it was always a bit of a niggle for me. So I've been involved in therapeutic things for quite a while, and I got into NLP and I got into EFT. And this kind of background sense of something not quite right, not quite acceptable. Very hard to get a grip on, very hard to deal with. It's kind of almost deeply ingrained. And I went on a training with a guy called Andy Austin, who's a therapist here in the UK. And it had a piece for working with identity beliefs, like I am not good enough, or there is something wrong with me. And it started with a really simple question. And actually, this is something your audience can do if they have an I am something or other. I'm not good enough. I'm a bad person. They might like to think of this. And here's the question. So he has to say the belief, I am, whatever it is. How old is the I in I am? And then whatever it is. And the answer popped into my head with doing this exercise in this course, which has nothing to do with tapping, completely non-tapping intervention. This popped into my head and I worked with this. I thought, because I'm a terrible fiddler with things. I like to really try and experiment with things. How can I put tapping into this? Yeah. And that was about 12 years ago. So I started fiddling and trying stuff out to use this kind of approach of getting to the things in me that were troublesome to me and softening them. And I think it's fair to say I'm not the man I used to be, and it's an improvement in my opinion. So that's how it developed. And then I just started using it on myself. And then I started using it with clients and then thought, time to wheel this out into the big wide world and see if it could be useful for other people as well. So then after just kind of that, I guess process-wise, like that question is great. You know, I love questions like that. When you feel that feeling, how old do you feel? I love the way you framed it that way. I oftentimes put the little preamble on it, even though I don't know the answer to this question, you know, and just like giving myself an out. So it's not like, because it's really easy when we hear something like that to go, okay, now this is a puzzle I'm going to solve and it's going to give me a specific piece of information. And we're interacting with the subconscious mind. It's a little less straightforward than that sometimes. And so I love caveating it and creating that space. I usually say something like, I'm going to ask you a really weird question. And I just ask it. And that's enough. It astonishes me that people can answer that question. I mean, it's such a bizarre question.
Yeah.
It's even more bizarre that everyone can answer it.
Yeah, and because we're accessing the subconscious mind, and the subconscious mind's a metaphor machine. And so the other thing that's important when we do that is that it doesn't necessarily mean something really specific happened to me when I was 6. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But it's giving us an entry point into our experience where we're creating this place that we can go in, and it doesn't have to literally be when I'm 6 years old. But that's how the mind's understanding as we step in.
Well, there are two answers to the question, really. One is the age, and the other one is it reminds somebody, it brings a memory up. In which case you could use memory tapping, which is great for memories, perfect stuff. It's the other ones that are tricky for because there are no memories attached.
Yeah.
Or so no memories necessary.
So process-wise, no memories are attached. How do we kind of step into that? How do we think about that particular thing?
Well, this particular way, I think, is to use the power of the imagination, really, is to have the person imagine they could take that younger self and put that younger self out in front of them so they can see them. As if it was a kind of a mini-me sort of thing, kind of a younger version of yourself. And what typically happens is you get a very good, very clear representation of what was going on for that younger self at that time. So they display in the way that you'd be able to see in someone else. If you were to look at someone else's child, you can say, look, they're looking really sad, they're really unhappy, they're angry. You can see all that and you can tap for it. Which is to say surrogate tapping for your younger self.
Yeah, and the like one of the things that we're understanding more and more about this, the mind and the way that it works, when we're able to create a half a step of disassociation, it's amazing how much more clearly we can see something, to the point where they've done experiments where if you're sitting at your desk and you take a step back, you will see the problem that you're working on in a different way, even though you've just physically changed your location a little bit. You're looking at the same screen at the same desk. And so it's amazing how, like, I give really really good advice that I don't always apply to myself. And what you're doing here is you're doing a really good job of creating a space where I can give really good advice, which happens to be myself in this little version form. And so it's so powerful when we step in that way.
It also has the advantage of, I don't know about you, but it feels very complicated in here. I feel like I'm a very complicated person. And it's all kind of mushed up. And so taking that out kind of separates it out. And I mean, Gary Craig went on about being specific. And this is a way to be very specific with something that's usually very vague and tangled.
Yeah. So the basic, doing a little tapping for this cute little pumpkin who's in front of us that we're perceiving. What else can we do with that information once we've uncovered it in that particular way?
Well, there's the tapping for the younger self. Because the way that I think about things is that as you're growing up, your basic prime directive as a child is to survive. And if you grow up in a nice household, nice home, where everyone looks after you and they're kind and supportive, that's fairly easy. That's kind of, you come out the end of this perfect family, happy family, being a reasonably together human. So, of course, that's at one end of the spectrum. But then the rest of us have a more kind of mixed thing. And then some of us have a not very good experience at all. So as you're coming up, you're faced with experiences, things you have to do to survive. So you end up in situations where you're stressed and distressed, and you might not have the kind of resources you need. And that's when parts of ourselves split off. They have to handle the show. They have to kind of take care of it in the best way they can. Not an easy job being a kid. You don't have the resources. You don't have so you end up having stress and distress is what you've got, and what you don't want, and what you haven't got and what you do want are things like you'd get from a good caregiver, like love, compassion, attachment, soothing, all those kind of things. So when this representation of your younger self appears, you can do all the soothing that they needed at the time but didn't get. So all the different emotions that they felt, all the fear, the stress, the distress, the sadness, the anxiety, the anger, all the rest of it can be processed and softened just using tap, because tapping is so good for that. Just so good for that. So then you end up in an ideal situation with a younger self that's very calm and relaxed. And then you can give them what they needed but never had through the use of metaphor. So typically, things that younger selves have are things like feeling safe is one. So you can just be metaphorical about this. Okay, so feeling safe had a colour. What would it be? Oh, blue. It amazes me that people can answer that question as well.
Yeah.
So send them all the blue feeling safe that they need. And so on and so on and so on through every single thing that that younger self needs. The maximum number so far has been 32 items for one person, which is a lot. But some kids, need a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that I really like what you're doing in there is sometimes, like, I recently was teaching a class on metaphor and doing the exact same thing of asking the client or asking the inner child part what it needs and what it looks like, because sometimes we feel like I have to solve the problem and give them the resource that is there, and they know so much better,
Yes.
I one time was doing something similar like this, and I'm like, so what's the resource we need? And the client said, Bruce Willis from Die Hard. I'm like, okay, that is an interesting way for you to feel safe in this particular moment. But in a million billion years, I would have never come up with that. And so asking the part and doing that, I think that's really good for us to hear. So it's not an intellectual exercise. It's metaphorical in their language.
Yes. And the way this is going is with all the tapping, because tapping is quite trancey. So this is a very trance-like process. By the time they've got to this stage, there's the unconscious is in full swing, unable to provide things or notice things that are completely oblivious to the adult self, or may even seem strange to them. I have no idea why they need this, but they need this, which is absolutely fine. So the ideal situation, you're sending them this, then you're inviting them to take on board all those things, and then by which time the younger self is usually doing a lot better than they were when you started. And then to bring them back into yourself. You put them out there. It's no good leaving bits of yourself lying around. You want to bring them back in, put them into their rightful place, which is something they didn't have before, usually. A rightful place. And then invite them to grow up. There's a lot of thing about inner children thing is that you have all these inner children. Not many people seem to think about having them grow up. Which, if you think about outer children, if you had a child who kind of grew up to the age of 5 and then stopped, you'd very soon become concerned that everyone else is growing up, but they're not. So this is the kind of chance they can take advantage of everything you've learned since. Because if your romantic life was being run by a distressed 5-year-old, it's wonderful that they're all happy and fully resourced, but it's not good having a romantic life run by a 5-year-old. They're not really equipped for the job.
Yeah.
They need to know stuff.
Yeah. And I like that a lot because it's recognizing, I think, again, this level that we often miss is it's recognizing it's not just enough for us to be well resourced. We also need to be capable. And being well-resourced oftentimes will either allow us to tap into our capability and our competency. And sometimes what it does is it creates the space and capacity for us to go and learn and do something in that particular way. I mean, that's even true for me today. I'm working on a course right now, and first thing I do every time I sit down is I take 3 or 4 minutes to just unburden everything that is going on around me so I can be fully present as a learner for however many minutes or hours that I'm sitting down. And so it makes perfect sense when we're working with an inner child part that we would want to grow it up into being capable, not just feeling safe.
Well, some of the resources can be capabilities, like some of the things that sometimes asked for are things like the ability to speak up, which if you're a silenced child is kind of an important ability. So after all that, and there's usually some kind of change. So that's the simple, straightforward one. And that's just helping the inner child. But I think there's a bit more to it than that. There's more that's possible to that. Because once you've externalized or brought out this younger self in front of you, you now have the relationship between them and you as the adult. Because oftentimes our relationships with our younger selves are not very cordial. When I first started this, I used to think that... someone would see their suffering younger child and they go, oh, poor thing. Oh, how lovely. I feel so warmly to them. And then one client said, that expletive deleted ruined my life. So I had to think, okay, so there's a bit of tension here. I can see it. And so that needs processing as well. So there is a kind of an opportunity for a rapprochement or a coming together between yourself, your adult self, and all those younger parts who part of you thinks has been ruining your life deliberately, even though they were doing the best they could at the time.
It's as you say, it's interesting. I had a client of mine who we were creating a resource where the inner child could get the adult part's attention. And she's like, I don't want that interrupting me. It's like, oh, okay, we have some work that we need to do here. And I hadn't put it in that particular vocabulary that you're putting in. But it was like, oh, yeah. It's not just care, there's relationship. It's good for us to recognize that.
And also that oftentimes, as our adult selves, we can be channeling our parents or the very person who created the problem in the first place.
Right.
So I'm sure that most people know someone who's very sensitive to criticism who also appears to be extremely critical at the same time.
Right.
So it's kind of like both ends of it. So you have the opportunity to defuse that as well. So that their critical self comes out to their younger self who's been criticized. So you have a chance to repair all that.
Yeah. And I love, like, you know me, I love a good system, just kind of incrementally. It's just like acknowledging and recognizing, caring for, resourcing, bringing in, repairing a relationship like that, just logically, like not only are the important steps, like this feels like the exact right order as we're trying to mend our way to something like this.
Yes, and you have to take care of the stress and distress first on both sides, because you can't resource someone who's stressed. It's not.
And I want to highlight what you just said there, on both sides, because so often, and we've said this a couple of times, but so often when we're doing inner child work, the child part, there's also this part of it as well. And I like highlight, bold, stick a pin next to that. That's such a great idea inside of that.
Yeah. So that's a kind of important. I had no idea that was going to be part of the work when I started. I thought it's all about the inner child, but then it turns out it's about how I feel about the inner child. So that's an important part. Excuse me. So sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just like, as we're meandering along, which is kind of like, how does this continue to unfold?
Well, this is the simple one, and I mean, I'll put simple in quotes. This is all simple in principle and rather complicated in practice. Any of my trainees will tell you it's not nearly as straightforward as I'm making it out to be here.
Well, and I'm always a big proponent when looking at transformation to recognize that there's a difference between simple and easy. It can be a very simple process, but doesn't mean that the steps are. It's very simple for me to get to your part of the world. I get on an airplane and I go there. It's very easy. Go to the airport, get on the plane, land, get off. That's simple, not necessarily easy. So
So there's quite a bit of subtlety in it, and I would say that it's starting to. It can get more complicated even than that, because I've been talking about like. There is something wrong with me. In this case, there's only one me, or I am a bad person. There's only one I in that. Sometimes people say things like, I hate myself, or I give myself a hard time. Now you have two parts.
Right.
There's an I who's doing the hating, and there's a myself who's being hated.
Yeah, the thing that is being
hated. And there's an adult who's having to manage this little tennis match that goes on as well. So now you have a kind of a three-way thing. But it gets possible to kind of resolve those sort of conflicts as well. Doing the same kind of thing, tapping for both sides, making sure that everything is cool between both sides eventually, after some work, and then integrating the whole thing again.
And this is, I think, partially just my disposition, but also partially lots of experience. Like, I love how systematized this is, because as we're doing, like, it's always easier to manage something that has a plan. And what is beautiful about this is each step along the way, there is the space for the creativity of what needs to happen. Like tapping for myself. Well, tapping for myself could look like a million different things, but I'm now in the stage of, okay, great. In the relationship between adult Gene and 6-year-old Gene, what is the emotion I'm feeling right now? Awesome. Yeah. What are the tools that I have to bear to deal with what I'm feeling, the frustration, the overwhelm, the feeling incompetent, whatever it is? Or like you're talking about when we're resourcing apart, there's 87 million ways that we can resource apart or what comes up in that process. But it's basically like, okay, we're now sitting inside of this box with this sort of agenda. Awesome. Now let's use all of our creative skills and sort of that. This, and along the way. I mean, it's, you got this from a modality that wasn't tapping related. For me, almost everything I do in tapping is something I learned somewhere else, and I just happen to tap at the exact same time.
We're terrible borrowers.
We are creative innovators in the way that we are inspired.
Yes, that sounds so much better. Right,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Awesome. So then, as we're navigating something like this, what are, other than the fact that like it's simple, but, dealing with child parts can be complicated at times, what are some of the other, pits that we could fall into or things to pay attention to as we're driving down a road like this that might be surprising or be aware of?
Okay. I would say the first thing is that you need somebody to do this with you. You need someone to hold the space. Some of these are quite easy. Some of the stuff that you end up with can be quite sort of painful and traumatic for both sides. So there needs to be very good holding of the space for this. This is not a kind of simple thing you could do for yourself in 10 minutes tapping. So there's that. There's all the usual things, a kind of reluctance to feel things that are intense. And so people can be faced with the possibility of both having to work with their own intense feelings and seeing the intensity of others. So you get all the things you get in other sessions, people wanting to dissociate from it, or kind of fall into it when it gets too strong. So there's all the kind of good management of distress that you have in EFT. So that's one of the pitfalls. The other thing I would say is people's conscious minds are constantly trying to fix things that don't need to be fixed. And it's really hard to, I think it's a bit like growing a plant, really. You give it water, you give it sun, you give it soil, the plant will take care of itself. Thank you very much. So there's a terrible kind of design, either to sort the younger self out. I'll tell them what they're doing wrong. I'll show them this is what they need to do. They need to do this, this, and this, or they shouldn't feel bad, all that kind of stuff. So it's very, it takes quite a bit of patience actually for the adult self to become fully and genuinely attentive to the younger self. The other things are, if in their history, in the child's experience, adults can't be trusted, the person who's doing the tapping is also an adult. And might not also be able to be trusted. Or they might even be blamed. You left me, you deserted me. Where the hell were you when I needed you? So there's all that kind of stuff going, which can be hard to bear for the adult as well. So there's all the traps of a relationship, really. All those difficulties are kind of bound up in this imaginary representation of what's going on.
And I think, you're pointing to, having someone guiding us and holding a space for that, it's no different than any sort of mediation process that even when we have well-formed, thoughtful people in mediated process, they see the world from their point of view because that's what we do. And it's nice to have someone on the outside going, actually, what I hear you saying, or I'm wondering if, and being in the circumstance where we have someone particularly, this is, oftentimes this sort of stuff is really critical, deep stuff that has lots of pain around it, and making sure that everybody is safe inside of that, having guidance inside that makes so much sense because it's about relationships, even though it's an internal relationship in a system.
It requires quite a deal of diplomacy at times from the point of the person guiding the work. to help the other people be diplomatic as well. And of course, you can't see what's going on. So it's like you have the ear against the door of where something is being discussed or going on. So you have to kind of figure it out from there. So it makes it kind of keeping track of everyone is a little bit interesting. Another interesting thing, sorry, there's another interesting thing. There might be more than one younger self. So far, I've had one person had 7 younger selves. Unfortunately, the room I was working in had a sofa, so they were all lined up in age on the sofa, and we just went with them one by one, which is very sweet.
Yeah, and that's not a surprise. Like what, even just a simple question. I know you don't know the answers if you did, but what age does this remind you of? Regularly, clients will say 6, 13. Like the fact that there is more than one is something that makes a lot of sense because, my experiences are going to echo because I'm the person who's showing up in those particular places. And if I'm feeling that I don't belong, don't have agency, don't have worth, more than likely I'm going to have felt that at multiple times in my life. And the fact that it's showing up in multiple ways makes sense as we're navigating that.
Well, I think sometimes it's like those little Russian dolls, the Matryoshka dolls, where there's kind of one inside the other, and so on. So it's a little bit like that. And so then as we're navigating that, I guess part of it also is like, for me, is even though this feels like it's a process we're doing this in session, I'm guessing that this is something that can happen over a great deal of time. And I don't just mean a long session, but multiple sessions. It's so often because I've even been in circumstances where we were doing some sort of internal work with the inner child part. And at the end of it, the inner child is feeling safe, is feeling comfortable, is feeling competent, is feeling completely integrated. And I come back a week and a half later and there's still more distress that's there. Sure.
And that doesn't mean the process has failed, but oftentimes it means that was all we had access to, or that's what the capacity was.
Yes,
so as you're like seeing this unfolding over time, what does that typically look like?
Well, sometimes the process can go very fast. In some cases, usually it's something that happens over time. And at the end of each session, I would ask somebody, just put that younger self in a safe place. That could be on the inside or the outside, and then we'll come back to them. And then there's usually a period of fermentation goes on after this process. So then when we come back, we just kind of, okay, so bring them out again. What's going on for them now? And we just pick up and carry on. So this may span several sessions. I mean, depending on what the thing is, they go 5, 10 sessions, something like that.
Yeah.
That's fairly long. And what typically happens, the clients that I work with, it's usually when thing is taken care of, there's a period of reintegration, and then new stuff comes to light. Things that were previously hidden by this show up. Okay, now there's this. And then, so we go on with this, and so on and so on and so on. And work our way through the younger selves, as I call them, as I think of them, until it's used up. I think there's most people think they only have a few inner children. Personally, I think there's an entire school system's worth.
Oh, I think the school system is an underestimate of it. It's kind of the snapshot that goes on and on and on. And one thing I want to that you said in there that I think is really interesting vocabulary that I think it's always good for us to pay attention to. You use the phrase, it could take a long time, 10 sessions, and compared to multiple other modalities, 10 sessions is actually very, very fast. And it's really easy for us as tappers because there are things where we get such immediate relief that we start to very, very quickly recalibrate what a reasonable timeline is. And I think it's great that you're saying here that a reasonable timeline could be multiple months if we're doing something like this weekly, but it's really deep work that takes time to do that.
Yes.
And happiness is outcome divided by expectation. And so I think it's really, really clear when we're doing this sort of work that we have clear expectations, because we could be moving along at an amazing clip, but if that's slower than I want it or I expect it to be, then I can be frustrated, disappointed, and I can wander away from the work. And so the fact that you're like pre-framing it and saying, hey, this might be the size of the bushel that we're dealing with. Oh yeah. And there might be another one behind it, and there might be another one behind it, and there might be another one behind it. I think is a really good, thoughtful, healthy thing for us to do.
This is much more like gardening than sprinting, I think.
Yeah.
But it takes time and no miracle cure, but good results.
And the other thing that I like about that gardening metaphor, like you mentioned, is we do what we do in a garden, and then we have to wander away and let the garden do its thing.
Sure, absolutely.
Like you're talking about that fermentation process. The analogy I often use is software upgrade reboot. Like it takes a little while for even though it's downloaded everything it needs to do, the system has to turn off, has to turn back on, has to integrate, has to update, and all of that sort of stuff. And recognizing that it's like there are things that happen spontaneously, and there are things that, like, if I've had the habit of I am useless, thinking that thought for a very long time, even if I emotionally catch up to that, there's still all the habitual parts of me acting out of that particular belief that it's going to take a while for this to connect and integrate too.
Well, my first homework recommendation for people is to take a nap, because the process is only the start of the process. And it can even, I warn people it's possible they might have what I think of as a hangover effect, is that they may feel out of sorts for a couple of days as the mental furniture gets rearranged, just so they know that that's a possibility. And people report, I was kind of felt a bit strange for a couple of days, and then I felt fine, as the kind of system comes into balance again, and then the next thing's available for work. So there's a change and catching up with the change, as you say.
And I think it's like, for all of us who are working with other people, I think pre-framing that regardless of the tool set that we're using is a really useful thing, because if we don't, someone can feel like it's not working. They can feel like they've done something wrong. And by normalizing the experience before they have it, even if it's something that only happens 20% of the time, it's like, this is a possibility. And so when it's happening, it's like, Andy mentioned this might be a possibility for me. Look at that. It's showing up in that particular way. And I think that's just good, thoughtful practitionering and caring for other people inside of that.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, I think there's a lot of that required, really. And I think it helps make it understandable as well. It's kind of like, this, I'm feeling a bit off kilter. It's not a sign that something's wrong. There's a sign of actually something is changing.
Right. Particularly
for people who think, I've been working on this for years and nothing has changed. So there's which is a very common kind of thing. I've been through 17 different therapies until I've got to this one. So noticing signs of change is a very good thing for people who've not had any experience of change over time. Yeah.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, as always, Andy, I appreciate your very thoughtful, deliberate approach to transformation. I think it does us well when we have really clear guardrails to help us guide the process in such a way, because when we're in the midst of stuff, it's really, really super easy to get lost. And I love the framework, but the flexibility of a framework like this. It affords, the rigor as well as the curiosity of transformation. So I really appreciate that.
Plenty of room for curiosity in all this.
Awesome. Excellent. Thanks for your time, Andy. I really appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. Happy to do it.
If you found this interview inspiring, I would encourage you to support the Peaceful Heart Network by going to 24hoursoftapping.com/support or clicking the link in the description. And you will see on the screen right now a playlist to all of the interviews from this year's and last year's 24 Hours of Tapping. I hope you enjoyed those as well.